Ashenmeres Queen. Lady Catherine of Dunmere had once believed Sir Tristan de Clare to be the most honorable of men until she saw him standing beside her father's murderer. Now, as he caught her by the waist in a dimly lit corridor, his voice was low, edged with something like regret. "You think I have betrayed you," he murmured. "But tell me, my lady, have you never betrayed someone yourself?" Chapter 1. The Serpent's Kiss. The great hall of Castle Lyonesse throbbed with a deceptive gaiety. Torches, thick as a man's arm, sputtered and hissed in their iron sconces, casting a flickering, orange light that danced across the assembled nobility. The air, thick with the scent of roasted boar, spiced wine, and the ever-present undercurrent of damp stone, seemed to vibrate with the low hum of conversation, the clinking of goblets, and the strained laughter that always accompanied Lord Edric's pronouncements. Lady Catherine of Dunmere, however, felt none of it. She sat rigidly beside her father, Lord Alaric, her gaze fixed on the empty space across the high table, a space that had been occupied, mere hours ago, by the king's emissary, Sir Gareth. Catherine traced the rim of her silver goblet, the cold metal a sharp contrast to the sudden, feverish heat that prickled her skin. Sir Gareth, with his easy smile and flattering words, had been more than just an emissary. He had been a potential suitor, a carefully orchestrated step in her father's grand plan to solidify Dunmere's alliance with the crown. Now he was dead, murdered. A dagger, bearing the crest of House Morion, plunged into his heart. Lord Alaric, his face a mask of controlled fury, had barely flinched when the news arrived, delivered by a breathless, mud-splattered messenger. He had merely nodded, his gray eyes, so like Catherine's own, hardening to flint. The Morions he had rasped, his voice surprisingly steady. "They dare?" Catherine had felt a cold dread creep into her heart. The Morions, ancient rivals of Dunmere, were known for their ruthlessness and their insatiable hunger for power. But to strike so boldly, so openly, it was an act of war. And yet, a tiny, insidious voice whispered in her mind, was it truly the Morions? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the rich velvet of her gown suddenly feeling constricting. Her gaze drifted towards the entrance of the hall, where Sir Tristan de Clare stood, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. Tristan, her father's most trusted knight, the man who had taught her to ride, to wield a sword in secret, of course, the man who had always been a steady, comforting presence in her life. But tonight he was different. There was a tightness to his jaw, a shadow in his usually warm brown eyes. He stood beside Lord Renard Morion, the head of the accused house, a man whose reputation for cruelty was only surpassed by his ambition. Renard, his face a study in arrogant disdain, was speaking in low, urgent tones to Tristan, and Catherine felt a sickening lurch in her stomach. She remembered, with a clarity that stung, the moment the messenger had burst into the hall. She had seen it, just for a fleeting second, before the chaos erupted. Tristan, standing behind Sir Gareth, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He had been close enough to know. She couldn't believe it. Tristan betray them? Betray her? It was unthinkable. And yet, the image was seared into her memory, a serpent's kiss of doubt that poisoned everything she thought she knew. Catherine, her father's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through her thoughts. "You are quiet tonight. Is the wine not to your liking?" She forced a smile, a brittle, meaningless curve of her lips. "The wine is excellent, father. I am merely preoccupied." Preoccupied? Lord Alaric raised a skeptical eyebrow. "With the Morions' treachery, no doubt. Be assured, daughter, they will pay for this." His words, meant to reassure, only fueled the fire of her unease. She glanced again at Tristan, who was now listening intently to something Renard Morion was saying, his expression unreadable. The flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows on the stone walls, making the scene seem almost theatrical, a macabre play where the actors were all masked, their true intentions hidden. Later, as the feast wound down and the guests began to disperse, Catherine found herself alone in a dimly lit corridor, her footsteps echoing on the cold flagstones. She had excused herself from the hall, claiming a headache, but in truth, she needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of suspicion and deceit. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with a solid form. Strong hands caught her by the waist, steadying her. She looked up, her heart pounding, into the face of Sir Tristan de Clare. The corridor was illuminated only by a single, distant torch, casting his face in deep shadow. His grip on her was firm, almost possessive, and she felt a tremor of fear, mixed with a strange, unsettling awareness of his proximity. The scent of him leather, steel, and something indefinably him filled her senses. "My lady," he murmured, his voice low, edged with something like regret. "You are troubled." It was a statement, not a question. She pulled away from him, her hands instinctively going to the small, silver dagger she kept concealed beneath her gown. It was a foolish gesture. She knew Tristan could disarm her in an instant. But the act of touching the cold steel gave her a semblance of control, a fragile shield against the storm raging within her. "Troubled?" she echoed, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir Gareth is dead. My father's alliance shattered. And you stand beside the man who is accused of his murder." Tristan's eyes, dark and unreadable in the dim light, held hers. "Accused, my lady. Not convicted." "The evidence is clear," she retorted, her voice rising. The dagger could have been planted," he interrupted, his voice still low, but with a steely undertone that sent a shiver down her spine. "There are many who would benefit from seeing Dunmer and Morian at war." Catherine stared at him, her mind reeling. Was it possible? Could he be telling the truth? Or was this another layer of deception, a carefully constructed lie to protect himself, or worse, to protect Renard Morian? He took a step closer, his presence filling the narrow corridor. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and something else, something she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. "You think I have betrayed you," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "But tell me, my lady, have you never betrayed someone yourself?" His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations, with a challenge that struck at the very core of her being. Her past, her secrets, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, all of it seemed to crumble under his intense gaze. A memory, sharp and painful, flashed through her mind, a whispered promise, a stolen kiss, a betrayal that had cost her dearly. A silence built. Catherine knew the answer. Chapter 2. Shadows of Dunmer. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the castle settling for the night, the creak of timbers, the muffled clang of a dropped pot, the faint, mournful howl of a hound in the kennels. Catherine felt the weight of Tristan's gaze, the unspoken question hanging between them like a drawn sword. Her own betrayal, the one she had tried so desperately to bury, rose up to choke her. She remembered Elias, the young squire with laughing eyes and a poet's soul. He had been her father's ward, destined for knighthood, but his heart belonged to the arts, to the songs he composed and the verses he whispered in her ear during stolen moments in the castle gardens. Their love had been a fragile, fleeting thing, a secret bloom in the harsh landscape of duty and obligation. And then had come Lord Penthin, a powerful, older nobleman, seeking an alliance with Dunmer. Her father, ever pragmatic, had seen the advantage, the strengthening of their borders, the increase in their wealth. Catherine had been offered, a pawn in his game of power. She had pleaded, wept, even threatened to run away. But her father had been unyielding. Elias, young and powerless, had been no match for Lord Penthin's influence. And Catherine, torn between her love for Elias and her duty to her family, had made a choice. A choice that had haunted her ever since. She had told her father about Elias's secret desire to abandon his knightly training and join a monastery, a desire he had confided in her alone. It was a betrayal of trust, a calculated move to remove him from the equation. Her father, furious at Elias's perceived weakness, had banished him, sending him to a remote abbey, far from Dunmer, far from her. The memory of Elias's stricken face, the look of utter bewilderment and hurt in his eyes, still had the power to make her flinch. She had sacrificed his happiness, his future, for her own survival? Or was it cowardice? Catherine began, her voice a mere whisper. She couldn't meet Tristan's gaze, her shame too raw, too exposed. Tristan, however, seemed to understand. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, the callous tips of his fingers surprisingly tender. "We all carry shadows, my lady," he said softly. "It is what we do with them that defines us." His words, meant to offer comfort, only intensified her inner turmoil. He was right, of course. But his own shadows, what were they? What had driven him to stand beside Renard Morian, the man who might be responsible for Sir Gareth's death? She pulled away from his touch, the warmth of his hand lingering on her skin. "Your shadows seem particularly dark tonight, Sir Tristan," she said, her voice gaining a semblance of strength. Standing beside a suspected murderer, it casts a long shadow indeed. He didn't flinch at her accusation, but his eyes darkened, a flicker of pain crossing his features. "I stand where I must, my lady," he replied. "My loyalty is to Dunmere, to your father. Sometimes that loyalty requires difficult choices." "Difficult choices?" Catherine scoffed, her anger flaring again. "Is that what you call betraying your oaths, betraying the trust that has been placed in you?" "I have betrayed no oath," Tristan said, his voice hardening. "And I would ask you to trust me, Lady Catherine. I know this looks damning, but there is more to this than meets the eye." His words, so earnest, so compelling, resonated with a part of her that desperately wanted to believe him. She had known him all her life. He had been her protector, her confidant, her friend. Could he truly be capable of such treachery? And yet, the doubt lingered, a serpent coiled in the pit of her stomach. The image of him standing behind Sir Gareth, his hand on his sword the way he had looked at Renard Morian, with something that almost resembled respect. "Trust you?" she repeated, her voice laced with skepticism. "How can I trust you when I do not know what game you are playing?" Tristan's jaw tightened. He took a step back, creating a distance between them that felt both physical and emotional. "I cannot reveal everything to you, my lady," he said. "Not yet. But I swear to you, on my honor as a knight, that I am working to uncover the truth, to protect Dunmere, even if it means appearing to be something I am not." His words were a gamble, she knew. He was asking her to trust him blindly, to believe in him despite the evidence, despite her own fears. And a part of her, the part that remembered the warmth of his smile, the strength of his arm around her when she had fallen from her horse as a child, the way he had always looked at her, with a mixture of protectiveness and something more, that part of her wanted to believe. But the other part, the part that had been hardened by betrayal, by the harsh realities of her world, held back. She had learned the hard way that trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, and that appearances could be deceiving. "I will give you the benefit of the doubt, Sir Tristan," she said finally, her voice cold and formal. "For now. But I will be watching you. And if I find that you have truly betrayed us, you will answer to me." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high, leaving him standing alone in the dimly lit corridor. But as she walked, she could feel his gaze on her, a mixture of frustration, determination, and something that felt unsettlingly like sadness. The shadows of Dunmere, she realized, were deeper and more treacherous than she had ever imagined. And she was walking right into them. The grand hall was empty. Chapter 3. The Knight's Accusation. The following morning dawned gray and bleak, the heavy clouds mirroring the mood that had settled over Castle Lyonesse. Catherine had slept little, her dreams plagued by images of daggers and shadows, of Tristan's face, both familiar and strangely alien. She rose early, dressing in a simple gown of gray wool, its plainness a reflection of her inner turmoil. She found her father in his solar, poring over maps and documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening slightly. "Catherine," he said, his voice gruff, but with an undercurrent of concern. "You look pale. Did you sleep well? As well as could be expected, father, she replied, forcing a small smile. He gestured to a chair beside his desk.
Seat.
We have much to discuss. Catherine obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew what was coming. The Morians. The alliance. The war that now seemed inevitable. I have sent ravens to all our allies, Lord Alaric began, his gaze fixed on the map spread out before him. Lord Penthin has pledged his support, as has Lord Arian. We will gather our forces here, at Lyonesse, and then march on Morian lands. Catherine nodded, her heart heavy. Lord Penthin. The very name sent a shiver of distaste down her spine. He was a powerful ally, but a cruel and ambitious man. She had managed to avoid his advances since Sir Gareth's death, using the excuse of mourning, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. And what of Sir Tristan? She asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Her father's expression hardened. He remains with the Morians, he said, his voice tight with disapproval. He claims he is gathering information, playing the spy. I am skeptical. As am I, Catherine said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Lord Alaric looked at her sharply. You doubt his loyalty? She hesitated, remembering Tristan's plea for trust, his vow on his knightly honor. But the image of him standing beside Renard Morian, the serpent's kiss of doubt, still lingered. I do not know what to believe, father, she admitted. He has always been loyal, but this he is playing a dangerous game, Lord Alaric said, his voice grim. And if he is playing us false, he will pay the price. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A young page entered, bowing low. My lord, he said, Sir Tristan de Clare requests an audience. He says it is urgent. Lord Alaric's eyes narrowed.
Send him in.
Tristan entered the solar, his face drawn and serious. He was dressed in his riding leathers, his sword at his side, and he carried a small, leather-bound pouch in his hand. He bowed to Lord Alaric, then turned to Catherine, his gaze lingering on her for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. My lord, he said, his voice calm but firm. I have news. And evidence. He placed the pouch on the desk before Lord Alaric. This was found in Sir Gareth's chambers, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Lord Alaric opened the pouch and drew out its contents. It was a letter, written in a fine, elegant hand, sealed with a crest that Catherine recognized instantly. It was not the crest of House Morian. It was the crest of House Arian. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Lord Arian, one of their supposed allies, a man who had pledged his support just hours before the letter was addressed to Renard Morian, and its contents were damning. It detailed a plot to assassinate Sir Gareth, to frame the Morians, and to provoke a war between Dunmere and Morian, a war that would leave both houses weakened and vulnerable to Arian's ambitions. This changes everything, Lord Alaric said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Tristan nodded. It does, my lord. Lord Arian is the true traitor. He used Sir Gareth's death to further his own goals, to sow discord and chaos. Catherine stared at Tristan, her mind reeling. He had been right. He had been working to uncover the truth, even while appearing to betray them. The relief that washed over her was immense, but it was quickly followed by a surge of guilt. She had doubted him, accused him, and he had still risked his life to protect Dunmere. She began, her voice choked with emotion. I owe you an apology, Sir Tristan. He met her gaze, his eyes softening. There is no need, my lady, he said. I understand your suspicions. I would have been suspicious myself. Lord Alaric, however, was not so easily appeased. He studied Tristan, his gaze sharp and assessing. How did you come by this letter? He asked. And why did you not reveal this sooner? Tristan's expression remained calm, but Catherine could sense the tension in his body. I had my suspicions about Arian, he explained, but I needed proof. I used my position with the Morians to gain access to Sir Gareth's chambers. As for why I did not reveal this sooner, I needed to be certain. And I needed to ensure that the letter would reach you safely, without being intercepted by Arian's spies. His explanation was plausible, but Catherine could see the doubt lingering in her father's eyes. The trust, once broken, was not so easily restored. "You will remain under guard," Lord Alaric said finally, his voice firm. "Until we can verify this information. I will send a raven to Lord Arian, demanding an explanation. If he is truly guilty, he will face the king's justice." Tristan bowed his head in acceptance. "As you wish, my lord." As he was being escorted from the solar by 2 guards, Tristan paused at the door and looked back at Catherine. His eyes held hers, and she saw in them a plea, a silent appeal for understanding. And in that moment, despite everything, despite the doubts that still lingered, she knew that she believed him. She trusted him. The door closed softly behind the knight. Chapter 4. A Glimmer of Steel. The days that followed were filled with a tense, uneasy quiet. Lord Alaric, his suspicions still simmering, kept Tristan confined to a small, sparsely furnished chamber in the castle's west tower. Catherine, however, was allowed to visit him, a concession her father had granted with reluctance, warning her to be wary of Tristan's silver tongue. She found him sitting by the window, gazing out at the bleak, wind-swept landscape. He looked up as she entered, a faint smile touching his lips. "My lady," he said, rising to his feet, "you honor me with your presence." "I came to see how you were faring," she replied, her voice soft. She had brought him a basket of food, bread, cheese, and a flask of wine, a small gesture of apology, of renewed trust. He gestured to a chair beside the window. "I am well enough, considering the circumstances. Though I confess, I grow weary of these stone walls." Catherine sat down, placing the basket on a small table. "My father is cautious," she said. "He has been betrayed before." Tristan nodded, his expression understanding. "I do not blame him. I would likely do the same in his position." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the wind whistling through the narrow window slits. Catherine studied him, his profile etched against the gray light. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes more pronounced, but there was still a strength in his bearing, a resilience that she admired. "Do you believe Lord Arian will confess?" she asked, breaking the silence. Tristan shook his head.
"He is too cunning for that."
"He will deny everything, claim the letter is a forgery. It will be our word against his." "And what then?" "Then," Tristan said, his voice grim, "it will be war. But this time, it will be Dunmer and Morian fighting side by side against a common enemy." The thought of an alliance with the Morians, their ancient rivals, was unsettling. But the prospect of facing Arian's treachery alone was even more daunting. "I still do not understand," Catherine said, her brow furrowed. "Why would Arian risk so much? He already had a strong alliance with Dunmer." "He wanted more," Tristan replied. "He wants the crown. He sees himself as the rightful heir, and he believes that by weakening Dunmer and Morian, he can seize the throne." Catherine shivered. The ambition of men, she thought, was a bottomless pit, a hunger that could consume everything in its path. "You risked your life to uncover this," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe.
"Why?"
Tristan met her gaze, his eyes, usually guarded, now open and vulnerable. "I did it for Dunmer," he said. "For your father." And he hesitated, his voice dropping to a whisper, "For you." His words, so simple, so direct, sent a warmth spreading through her chest. She had known, of course, that he cared for her, but to hear him say it, to see the depth of emotion in his eyes, it was both exhilarating and terrifying. She reached out, her hand covering his, the contact sending a jolt of awareness through her. His skin was warm and rough, the hand of a warrior, but his touch was gentle. "Thank you, Tristan," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "For everything." He turned his hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, his grip tightening. "I would do anything for you, Catherine," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Anything." The air between them crackled with unspoken feelings, with a longing that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The constraints of their world, the expectations of their station, the dangers that surrounded them, all of it seemed to fade away in that moment, leaving only the raw, undeniable connection between them. He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers, and she felt her heart pounding in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She knew what was coming, what she had been both yearning for and dreading. But before their lips could meet, a sudden, sharp clang echoed from the courtyard below. It was the sound of steel on steel, of swords clashing. Tristan pulled back, his eyes instantly alert, his warrior's instincts taking over. "What is that?" he said, his voice sharp. They rushed to the window, peering down at the courtyard. Below, a scene of chaos was unfolding. Men were fighting, their swords flashing in the dim light. And at the center of the fray, Catherine saw a figure she recognized instantly. Lord Arian. He had arrived at Lyonesse, not with a raven's reply, but with an army. And he was not here to negotiate. He was here to conquer. A small group of men had infiltrated the gates. Chapter 5. The Whispers of Court. The clash of steel echoed through the narrow confines of Tristan's chamber, a jarring counterpoint to the intimacy that had almost bloomed between them. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and adrenaline. Arian's arrival was a brazen act of aggression, a clear declaration of his treacherous intent. "He means to take the castle," Tristan said, his voice grim, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword that was, frustratingly, not there. He had been stripped of his weapons upon his confinement. Catherine felt a surge of anger, mixed with a cold determination. Arian would not succeed. Not while she drew breath. "We must warn my father," she said, turning to leave. But Tristan stopped her, his hand gripping her arm. "No," he said, his eyes intense. "You are not safe here. Arian will be looking for you, for your father. He will use you as leverage." "But listen to me," he interrupted, his voice urgent. "There is a secret passage behind the tapestry in this room. It leads to the stables. You must escape, get to the village, raise the alarm." Catherine hesitated. Leaving Tristan, unarmed and imprisoned, felt like a betrayal. But she knew he was right. She was more valuable to Dunmere alive and free than captured by Arian. "And you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tristan gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I will be fine. I can defend myself. And I know this castle better than Arian ever will." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She trusted him, with her life, with the fate of Dunmere. She reached out, her hand cupping his cheek, the brief touch conveying a depth of feeling that words could not express. "Be careful," she whispered. "Always," he replied, his eyes holding hers for a fleeting moment before he turned and moved towards the tapestry that covered the far wall of the chamber. He pulled the heavy fabric aside, revealing a narrow, dark opening in the stone wall. "Go," he urged, "and do not look back." Catherine took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped into the darkness. The passage was narrow and dusty, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and centuries of secrets. She moved quickly, her hands brushing against the rough stone walls, guided only by the faint glimmer of light that filtered in from the chamber behind her. As she made her way through the passage, she could hear the sounds of the fighting growing closer, the shouts of men, the clang of steel, the screams of the dying. The reality of the situation crashed down on her, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. The fate of Dunmere, of her father, of Tristan, it all rested on her now. She emerged from the passage into the stables, the familiar scent of horses, and a welcome contrast to the musty air of the secret tunnel. The stables were in chaos, the horses rearing and whinnying in their stalls, sensing the fear and violence that permeated the castle. She found her own mare, a swift, gray palfrey named Luna, and quickly saddled her. She mounted, her hands shaking slightly, and urged the horse towards the stable doors. As she rode out into the courtyard, she saw a scene of utter devastation. The fighting had spread, and the courtyard was a swirling mass of bodies, of steel and blood. She saw her father's men, outnumbered but fighting bravely, their faces grim and determined. She saw Arian soldiers, their armor emblazoned with his crest, their faces contorted with bloodlust. And then she saw him, Lord Arion, mounted on a huge black warhorse, his sword raised high, his eyes burning with a cold, ruthless fire. He was shouting orders, directing his men, his voice carrying over the din of battle. He saw her. Their eyes met across the chaos, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He pointed at her, shouting something she couldn't hear, and several of his soldiers turned, their swords pointed in her direction. Catherine dug her heels into Luna's flanks, urging the mare into a gallop. She rode towards the main gate, the only way out of the castle, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the pounding of hooves behind her, the shouts of her pursuers. She reached the gate, but it was closed, barred shut. She was trapped. She reined in Luna, the mare skidding to a halt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked back, her eyes searching the chaos for a way out, a glimmer of hope. And then she saw him, Tristan. He had somehow managed to escape his confinement, and he was fighting his way towards her, a borrowed sword in his hand, his face a mask of fierce determination. He was cutting down Aryan soldiers, clearing a path towards her, a beacon of hope in the midst of the storm. But he was outnumbered, surrounded. And Arion was watching, his cruel smile widening, his eyes filled with a cold, triumphant gleam. He knew, as Catherine did, that Tristan could not reach her in time. The whispers around them had been real. Chapter 6. Beneath the falcon's gaze. The gate remained stubbornly closed, a thick, iron-bound barrier between Catherine and freedom. Luna, sensing her rider's desperation, pawed the ground nervously, her breath clouding the cold air. Catherine's gaze remained locked on Tristan, her heart a painful knot in her chest. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, his borrowed sword a blur of silver in the flickering torchlight. But he was losing ground, forced back step by the sheer number of Aryan soldiers. Arion, still mounted on his warhorse, watched the scene unfold with a chilling detachment. He was a predator toying with his prey, savoring the moment before the kill. Catherine knew that he could order his men to overwhelm Tristan at any moment, but he was deliberately prolonging the fight, enjoying the spectacle of Tristan's struggle. She scanned the courtyard desperately, searching for any advantage, any sign of hope. Her father's men were still fighting bravely, but they were scattered and disorganized, unable to break through Aryan's lines. The castle guard, caught off guard by the sudden attack, were struggling to mount a cohesive defense. Her eyes fell on the winch that controlled the portcullis, the heavy iron grating that formed the inner barrier of the gate. It was operated by a series of gears and levers, located on a small platform above the gatehouse. If she could reach it, it was a desperate plan, a long shot, but it was the only chance she had. She dismounted Luna, tying the mare's reins to a nearby post. She knew she would be vulnerable on foot, but she couldn't risk Luna being injured or captured. She moved quickly, dodging through the chaos, her gray gown blending with the shadows. She slipped past fighting men, her heart pounding in her ears, her senses on high alert. She could smell the blood, the sweat, the fear that permeated the air. She reached the gatehouse, finding the narrow, winding staircase that led to the platform. She climbed swiftly, her hand gripping the rough stone wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She emerged onto the platform, the wind whipping at her hair, the cold air stinging her face. The winch was there, a complex mechanism of gears and levers, its iron surface gleaming in the torchlight. She had seen it operated before, but she had never touched it herself. She hesitated, her hands hovering over the levers. She knew that if she failed, if she jammed the mechanism, it would be impossible to open the gate. And Tristan, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had to do this. For Tristan, for her father, for Dunmere. She grasped the main lever, her hands trembling slightly. It was heavy, resistant, but she pulled with all her strength. The gears groaned, the chains rattled, and slowly, agonizingly, the portcullis began to rise. From her vantage point, she could see the entire courtyard. She saw Tristan, still fighting, his face streaked with blood and sweat, his movements slowing. He was surrounded, his back against the closed gate, his sword arm hanging limply at his side. Arion, seeing the portcullis rising, let out a roar of fury. He spurred his horse forward, his sword raised, his eyes fixed on Tristan. Catherine screamed, a wordless cry of despair. She pulled harder on the lever, her muscles screaming in protest, her hands raw and bleeding. The portcullis was rising, but too slowly, and then, just as Arion was about to reach Tristan, a figure burst through the ranks of Arian soldiers, a whirlwind of steel and fury. It was Lord Renard Morian, his face a mask of grim determination, his sword flashing in the torchlight. He was followed by a dozen of his own men, their armor emblazoned with the Morian crest. They had arrived. The unexpected alliance, forged in the crucible of Arion's treachery, had come to fruition. Morian engaged Arion, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. The two men were evenly matched, both skilled warriors, both driven by a fierce determination. The fight was brutal, relentless, a dance of death played out beneath the falcon's gaze, the stone carving atop of Lioness's highest spire. Catherine continued to pull on the lever, her body aching, her vision blurring. The portcullis was almost fully raised, a narrow gap of freedom opening beneath it. Tristan, seeing his chance, ducked beneath the rising gate and rolled to safety, just as Arion's sword whistled past his head. He scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his eyes meeting Catherine's across the courtyard. He gave her a small, grateful nod, a silent acknowledgement of her courage, of her desperate gamble that had saved his life. And in that moment, despite the chaos and the danger that still surrounded them, Catherine felt a surge of hope. They were not defeated. Not yet. The falcon had chosen. Chapter 7. The Price of Silence. The arrival of Lord Morian and his men turned the tide of the battle, but the fighting remained fierce and brutal. The courtyard of Castle Lioness, once a place of feasts and celebrations, was now a scene of carnage, the ground slick with blood, the air thick with the cries of the wounded and dying. Catherine, exhausted but resolute, remained on the platform above the gatehouse, her hands still gripping the winch lever. She watched the battle unfold below, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes constantly searching for Tristan and her father. She saw Tristan fighting alongside Morian's men, his borrowed sword a blur of silver, his movements fluid and deadly despite his injuries. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of steel and fury, driven by a fierce determination to protect his home, his people, and the woman he loved. She saw her father, Lord Alaric, leading a small group of his own men, their armor battered and bloodstained, their faces grim and resolute. He was a seasoned warrior, a veteran of countless battles, and he fought with a courage and skill that belied his age. But the battle was far from over. Arion's forces, though initially surprised by Morian's arrival, were still numerous and well-equipped. They fought with a desperate ferocity, driven by their leader's ambition and their own fear of his wrath. Catherine saw Arion himself, still locked in combat with Lord Morian, their swords clashing in a deadly dance. The two men were evenly matched, their skills honed by years of training and warfare. The outcome of their duel, Catherine knew, could determine the fate of the battle, the fate of Dunmere. She watched, her breath held captive in her chest, as Morian, with a sudden, unexpected move, disarmed Arion, his sword sending Arion's weapon spinning through the air. Arion stumbled, momentarily off balance, and Morian seized his chance. He lunged forward, his sword plunging into Arion's chest. Arion gasped, his eyes widening in disbelief, his body slumping to the ground. A collective gasp went up from Arian soldiers, their fighting spirit broken by the sight of their fallen leader. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Arion's men, demoralized and leaderless, surrendered, throwing down their weapons and kneeling in submission. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound the groans of the wounded and the ragged breathing of the exhausted survivors. Catherine released the winch lever, her hands trembling, her body aching with fatigue. She had done it. She had helped save Dunmere, helped save Tristan. She descended from the platform, her legs shaky, her knees almost buckling beneath her. She made her way through the chaos, her eyes searching for Tristan. She found him near the gate, tending to a wounded soldier. He looked up as she approached, his face streaked with blood and sweat, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Catherine," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're safe." She nodded, unable to speak, her throat choked with emotion. She rushed into his arms, her body trembling against his, her tears soaking his tunic. He held her tight, his arms strong and reassuring, his presence a balm to her shattered nerves. "It is over," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "We are safe." But even as they clung to each other, a sense of unease lingered in Catherine's heart. The battle was won, but the price of victory had been high. Many lives had been lost, many wounds inflicted, both physical and emotional. And there was still the matter of Arian's treachery, the conspiracy that had almost destroyed Dunmere. The truth had been revealed, but the consequences were still to be faced. Lord Alaric approached them, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. He looked at Tristan, his expression unreadable. "You fought bravely, Sir Tristan," he said, his voice formal. "You saved my daughter's life. And you proved your loyalty to Dunmere." Tristan bowed his head. "I did what I had to do, my lord." "Indeed," Lord Alaric said. "But there is still the matter of your association with the Morians. You were seen consorting with the enemy, even before Arian's treachery was revealed." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. Her father's suspicions, though understandable, were still a threat to Tristan, to their fragile, newfound trust. She was ordered, silently, to keep her distance. "I explain my reasons, my lord," Tristan said, his voice calm but firm. "I was gathering information, playing a dangerous game to uncover the truth." "And you succeeded," Lord Alaric acknowledged. "But your actions, they raised questions. They caused doubt. And in times like these, doubt can be as deadly as a sword." He had, it turned out, arranged for Catherine to marry. Chapter 8. A Dance of Deception. Lord Alaric's words hung in the air, a cold reminder of the precariousness of Tristan's position. Despite his bravery, despite his proven loyalty, the shadow of suspicion still lingered. Catherine felt a surge of anger, mixed with a desperate protectiveness towards the man she had come to trust, to love. "Father," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "Sir Tristan risked his life to save us all. He uncovered Arian's plot. He fought bravely against overwhelming odds. I am aware of his actions." "Catherine," Lord Alaric interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "And I am grateful. But gratitude does not erase past actions. Appearances matter, especially in times of war. We must be seen as strong, united, above reproach." He turned to Tristan, his gaze unwavering. "Sir Tristan, I will not imprison you again. You have earned your freedom. But I must ask you to distance yourself from my daughter. Until this matter is fully resolved, until the whispers have died down, it is best that you avoid any unnecessary contact." Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This was a cruel blow, a punishment for both her and Tristan. She could see the hurt in Tristan's eyes, the flicker of pain that crossed his features, but he remained outwardly composed. "As you wish, my lord," he said, his voice low but steady. He bowed his head in acceptance, the gesture both respectful and subtly defiant. Catherine felt a surge of despair. Her father's decision, though seemingly pragmatic, was driven by fear, by a desire to maintain control, to avoid any further scandal. He was sacrificing their happiness, their future, for the sake of appearances, and was protecting his plan. Later that day, as the castle began to recover from the aftermath of the battle, Catherine found herself wandering through the gardens, seeking a moment of solace amidst the chaos. The gardens, once a place of beauty and tranquility, were now scarred by the fighting, the flowers trampled, the fountains stained with blood. She found Tristan there, standing beneath a gnarled oak tree, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. He looked lost, isolated, the weight of his burden heavy on his shoulders. She approached him, her footsteps silent on the soft earth. He turned, his eyes widening slightly as he saw her. "Catherine," he said, his voice low, "you should not be here." "Your father—" "I do not care what my father says," she interrupted, her voice fierce. "I will not be kept away from you." He smiled sadly, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and resignation. "You are brave, my lady, but also reckless."
Perhaps, she admitted.
"But I will not let them dictate my feelings, my choices. I will not let them keep us apart." He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, the callous tips of his fingers surprisingly tender. "We must be careful, Catherine," he said. "Your father is a powerful man, and he has other plans for you." Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what he was referring to. Lord Penthin, the alliance, the marriage that her father had been so eager to arrange, the marriage that had been put on hold due to Sir Gareth's death and the subsequent war. "I will not marry him," she said, her voice firm. "I will not be a pawn in my father's games." Tristan's eyes searched hers, his gaze intense, filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Do you mean that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I do," she said. "I love you, Tristan, and I will not let anyone, not even my father, come between us." His face softened, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that melted the coldness in her heart. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, his body a shield against the world. "And I love you, Catherine," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "More than life itself." They stood there, embraced, beneath the ancient oak tree, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the beating of their hearts. It was a stolen moment, a brief respite from the dangers and uncertainties that surrounded them. But as they clung to each other, Catherine knew that their battle was far from over. They were caught in a web of intrigue and deception, a dance of power and ambition where the stakes were high and the consequences deadly. She had declared her love for Tristan, defied her father's wishes, and chosen her own path. But the path ahead was fraught with peril, and the price of their love might be higher than they could ever imagine. The dance was just beginning. Lord Alaric was watching them. Chapter 9. The Torn Tapestry. The days that followed were a strange mixture of relief and tension. The immediate threat of Arion was gone, his army dispersed, his ambition crushed. But the aftermath of his treachery lingered, like a stain on the fabric of Dunmere's court. Whispers and rumors circulated, fueled by fear and uncertainty. And at the center of it all was Tristan, his loyalty proven but his reputation still tainted by his association with the Morians. Catherine found herself caught between her love for Tristan and her duty to her father, her heart torn between her desire for happiness and the demands of her position. She met Tristan in secret, stolen moments in the gardens, in the deserted library, in the shadows of the castle walls. Their conversations were whispered, their touches fleeting, their love a fragile flame burning in the darkness. Lord Alaric, meanwhile, remained distant and unyielding. He was preoccupied with repairing the damage caused by Arion's attack, with shoring up Dunmere's defenses, and with re-establishing alliances. He treated Tristan with a cold formality, acknowledging his service, but keeping him at arm's length. One evening, Catherine found her father in his solar, poring over a large tapestry that hung on the wall. It depicted the history of Dunmere, a vibrant scene of battles and triumphs, of kings and queens, of knights and ladies. But the tapestry was damaged, a large tear running through the center, obscuring a portion of the scene. "Father," Catherine said, approaching him, "what are you doing?" Lord Alaric looked up, his expression weary. "This tapestry," he said, gesturing to the damaged section, "it is a symbol of Dunmere's strength, its resilience. But it is also a reminder of our vulnerability, of the wounds that can be inflicted by treachery and betrayal." Catherine understood his meaning. The torn tapestry represented not only the physical damage to the castle, but also the damage to their trust, to their sense of security. "It can be repaired, father," she said, trying to sound optimistic. Lord Alaric shook his head. Some things, once broken, can never be fully restored, he said, his voice heavy with sadness. The threads may be mended, the fabric rewoven, but the scar will always remain. His words were a veiled reference to Tristan, to the lingering doubt that still clouded their relationship. Catherine felt a surge of frustration, of helplessness. She wanted to defend Tristan, to argue his case, but she knew it would be futile. Her father's mind was made up. I have received a letter from Lord Penthin, Lord Alaric said, changing the subject abruptly. He offers his condolences for our losses, and he reiterates his desire for an alliance through marriage. Catherine felt a cold dread creep into her heart. She had hoped that her father might have reconsidered his plans, that he might have seen the depth of her feelings for Tristan. But his words made it clear that he had not. Father, she began, her voice trembling. Do not interrupt, Catherine, Lord Alaric said, his voice sharp. I know what you are going to say. You do not wish to marry Penthin. You are infatuated with Sir Tristan. But I will not allow your youthful passions to jeopardize the future of Dunmere. It is not just passion, father, Catherine argued, her voice rising. It is love. And Tristan is a good man, a loyal man. He has proven himself time and again. He has also consorted with the enemy, Lord Alaric retorted, his eyes flashing. He has played a dangerous game, and we are still feeling the consequences. I will not risk our alliance with Penthin, our security, for a whim. Catherine felt tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to scream, to rage, to tear down the tapestry herself, to destroy the symbol of the rigid, unyielding world that was keeping her from happiness. But she knew it would be useless. Her father was immovable, his determination fueled by a lifetime of duty and responsibility. He saw her as a pawn in his game of power, a piece to be moved strategically to ensure the survival of Dunmere. I will consider Lord Penthin's offer, Lord Alaric said, his voice softening slightly. But I will not force you, Catherine. I will give you time to adjust to the idea. But in the end, you must do what is best for Dunmere, for your family. He turned back to the tapestry, his fingers tracing the outline of a tear. Catherine, her heart heavy with despair, left the solar, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The torn tapestry, she realized, was not just a symbol of Dunmere's vulnerability. It was a symbol of her own broken heart, of the love that was being ripped apart by duty and obligation. The threads were pulling. Chapter 10. Scars of the Past. The weight of her father's words pressed down on Catherine, a heavy cloak of obligation and despair. She wandered through the castle, her usual haunts now imbued with a sense of melancholy, of impending loss. She avoided Tristan, knowing that any contact between them would only strengthen her father's resolve to separate them. She found herself drawn to the chapel, a small, quiet sanctuary tucked away in a remote corner of the castle. The air was cool and still, scented with incense and the faint aroma of beeswax candles. The stained glass windows, depicting scenes from ancient scriptures, cast colored light onto the stone floor, creating a mosaic of beauty and serenity. Catherine knelt at the altar, her hands clasped in prayer, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was a turmoil of conflicting emotions, of love and duty, of hope and despair. She felt lost, adrift, caught in a current she couldn't control. As she knelt there, she heard a soft footstep behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the castle servants, but instead, she saw Tristan. He stood in the doorway, his face etched with concern, his eyes searching hers. "Catherine," he said softly, "are you all right?" She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "No," she whispered. "I am not." He approached her, kneeling beside her at the altar. He took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring, a lifeline in the storm raging within her. "What is it?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What has happened?" She told him about her conversation with her father, about Lord Penthin's renewed proposal, about her father's unwavering determination to see the marriage through. She told him about her despair, her helplessness, her fear of losing him. Tristan listened patiently, his hand tightening around hers, his eyes filled with empathy and understanding. When she had finished, he was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flickering candles. "I knew this would be difficult," he said finally, his voice low. "But I did not realize how determined your father was." "He sees it as his duty," Catherine said, her voice bitter. "To secure Dunmere's future, no matter the cost." "And what of your duty?" Tristan asked, his eyes searching hers. "What of your own happiness?" Catherine looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I do not know," she whispered. "I am torn. I love you, Tristan. But I also love my father, my family. I do not want to betray them." Tristan sighed, his hand stroking her hair, his touch soothing her troubled spirit. "There are no easy answers, Catherine," he said. "But I believe that love and duty are not always mutually exclusive. Sometimes they can coexist. Sometimes we must find a way to reconcile them." He paused, his eyes darkening with a flicker of pain. "I have scars of my own, Catherine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Scars from the past, from choices I made, from betrayals I suffered." Catherine looked at him, her curiosity piqued. She knew little of Tristan's past, of his life before he came to Dunmere. He rarely spoke of it, and she had never dared to pry. "What scars?" she asked softly. He hesitated, as if reluctant to share his pain, to open up the wounds that had never fully healed. But then, he began to speak, his voice low and measured, his words painting a picture of a life marked by loss and sacrifice. He told her about his childhood, about his family, a noble house that had been destroyed by war, their lands confiscated, their name disgraced. He told her about his mother, who had died of grief, and his father, who had been killed in battle, leaving him an orphan, alone and vulnerable. He told her about how he had been taken in by a distant relative, a cruel and ambitious man who had used him as a pawn in his own political schemes. He told her about how he had been forced to fight in battles he didn't believe in, to betray oaths he had sworn, to witness atrocities that had haunted his dreams. He told her about how he had finally escaped, fleeing his relatives' clutches and seeking refuge at Dunmere, where Lord Alaric had taken him in, given him a new purpose, a new life. "I came to Dunmere seeking redemption," Tristan said, his voice filled with a mixture of regret and hope. "I wanted to forget the past, to start anew, and I did for a time. But the scars, they remain. They remind me of the choices I made, of the price of survival." Catherine listened, her heart aching for him, her own pain momentarily forgotten in the face of his suffering. She understood now why he had been so reluctant to trust, so guarded in his emotions. He had been hurt, betrayed, and he had learned to protect himself, to build walls around his heart. She reached out, her hand cupping his cheek, her fingers tracing the lines of his face, the scars that were both visible and invisible. "You are not alone, Tristan," she said softly. "I am here, and I will help you carry your burdens." The candles burned. Chapter 11. The Unspoken Vow. Tristan's confession, shared in the hushed sanctity of the chapel, created a new layer of intimacy between them. The shared vulnerability, the unveiling of past wounds, forged a bond stronger than any spoken vow. Catherine felt a deeper understanding of the man she loved, of the complexities that lay beneath his stoic exterior. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a gratitude that transcended words. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke of shared pain, of mutual healing, of a love that was growing stronger with each passing challenge. "Thank you, Catherine," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "For listening. For understanding." "There is nothing to thank me for," she replied, her voice husky with emotion. "I love you, Tristan, and I will stand by you no matter what." They remained in the chapel for a long time, talking, sharing their hopes and fears, their dreams for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. They spoke of their love, of their desire to be together, but also of the obstacles that stood in their way, of the duty that bound them to their families, to their positions. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the stained glass windows. They knew they had to leave. They couldn't risk being discovered together, not after Lord Alaric's explicit warning. "We must be careful," Tristan said, his voice filled with a mixture of reluctance and determination. "Your father will not give up easily." "I know," Catherine replied, "but neither will I." They left the chapel separately, returning to the bustling life of the castle, to the world of intrigue and obligation that threatened to tear them apart. But as they parted, they made a silent vow, an unspoken promise to each other, to fight for their love, to find a way to be together, despite the odds. The following days were a blur of activity. Lord Alaric was preparing for Lord Penthin's arrival, organizing a grand feast, making arrangements for the formal betrothal ceremony. Catherine moved through the preparations like a ghost, her heart heavy, her mind preoccupied with Tristan. She tried to avoid her father, unable to face his unwavering determination, his blind faith in the alliance with Penthin. She knew that he believed he was doing what was best for Dunmere, for her, but she couldn't reconcile his actions with her own desires, with her own sense of what was right. She found solace in stolen moments with Tristan, brief encounters in the corridors, in the gardens, in the stables. They spoke little, their conversations limited by the constant threat of discovery. But their eyes spoke volumes, their touches conveying a depth of feeling that words could not express. One afternoon, Catherine found herself in the library, seeking refuge from the preparations for the feast. She was browsing through the shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of the ancient books, when she heard a soft cough behind her. She turned and saw Tristan standing in the doorway. He looked hesitant, uncertain, as if unsure whether to approach her. "Tristan," she said softly, her heart quickening its pace. He came towards her, his eyes searching hers. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice low. "I have been thinking about what you said, about fighting for our love." Catherine nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation.
"And?" she asked.
"And I believe I have a plan," he said. "A way to convince your father to reconsider. A way to show him that our love is not a threat, but a strength." Catherine's eyes widened. "What plan?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tristan hesitated, his gaze flickering around the library, as if checking for eavesdroppers.
"It is risky," he said.
"And it will require your trust, your courage." "I trust you, Tristan," Catherine said, her voice firm. "With my life." He smiled, a faint, fleeting smile that warmed her heart. "Then listen closely," he said, "for I cannot repeat this." He told her his plan, his voice low and urgent, outlining a daring scheme that could either save their love or destroy everything. The vow had been made. Chapter 12. Flight into Twilight. Tristan's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. It involved a calculated deception, a carefully orchestrated series of events designed to expose Lord Penthin's true nature and, hopefully, convince Lord Alaric that the alliance was not only undesirable but dangerous. The core of the plan hinged on Penthin's known weakness, his arrogance, and his insatiable desire for power. Tristan believed that Penthin, confident in his position and eager to secure the alliance with Dunmere, would be susceptible to manipulation, that he could be goaded into revealing his true colors. The plan required Catherine to play a crucial role, a role that filled her with both fear and excitement. She was to pretend to accept Penthin's proposal, to feign interest in the alliance, to flatter his ego and encourage his advances. Meanwhile, Tristan, with the help of Lord Morian, who had become an unlikely ally, would gather evidence of Penthin's past misdeeds, of his cruelty and his ambition, evidence that could be used to discredit him in the eyes of Lord Alaric and the king. The risks were enormous. If they were discovered, if Penthin realized he was being manipulated, the consequences could be dire. Catherine could be forced into a marriage she abhorred, Tristan could be imprisoned or even executed for treason, and Dunmere could be plunged into another war. But the potential rewards were even greater. If they succeeded, they could break free from the constraints of duty and obligation. They could be together, and they could secure Dunmere's future on their own terms. "Are you sure about this, Tristan?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling slightly as they discussed the final details of the plan in the deserted stables, the scent of horses, and hay filling the air. "I am," he replied, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. "It is the only way, Catherine. We have tried reason, we have tried pleading, but your father is unyielding. We must fight fire with fire." Catherine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She trusted Tristan, with her life, with her future. She would play her part, no matter how difficult, no matter how dangerous. The following day, Lord Penthen arrived at Castle Lyonesse, accompanied by a large retinue of knights and servants. He was a tall, imposing man, with a stern face and a cold, calculating gaze. He greeted Lord Alaric with a formal courtesy, his eyes lingering on Catherine with a possessive air that made her skin crawl. The feast was a lavish affair, the great hall decorated with banners and tapestries, the tables laden with food and wine. Catherine, dressed in a gown of rich velvet, played her part perfectly, smiling politely, engaging in conversation with Penthen, even allowing him to hold her hand as they danced. It was a torturous experience, pretending to be interested in a man she despised, while her heart ached for Tristan, who was forced to watch from the sidelines, his face a mask of controlled emotions. But as the evening wore on, Catherine noticed a subtle shift in Penthen's demeanor. He became more boastful, more arrogant, his words laced with veiled threats and hints of his ambition. He spoke of his power, of his influence, of his plans to expand his territories, to become the most powerful lord in the kingdom. Catherine, following Tristan's instructions, subtly encouraged his boasts, feeding his ego, leading him down a path of self-revelation. She asked leading questions, expressed admiration for his strength, hinted at her own desire for power and influence. And Penthen, blinded by his own arrogance, fell into the trap. He revealed more than he intended, his words painting a picture of a ruthless, ambitious man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. As the feast drew to a close, Catherine knew that the first phase of their plan had been successful. Penthen had revealed his true nature, and she had witnessed it firsthand. But the most dangerous part of the plan was yet to come. Under the cover of darkness, Catherine knew that she was to follow a particular path. Tristan had arranged for a secret departure. She slipped away from the castle, making her escape as the moon hid behind thick clouds. She didn't look back. She knew she couldn't. A horse was saddled and waiting for her. She had to ride, and she had to ride fast. It was a flight into twilight. Chapter 13. Echoes in the Stone. The night air was cold against Catherine's face as she rode, the wind whipping through her hair, the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves a frantic counterpoint to the beating of her own heart. She followed the path Tristan had described, a narrow, winding track that led away from the castle, through the dark forest, towards an unknown destination. She was alone, vulnerable, her only protection the darkness and the speed of her horse. She could feel the eyes of the forest upon her, the rustling of leaves, the hooting of owls, the snapping of twigs, all amplified by her heightened senses, by the fear that gnawed at her insides. She had left behind everything she knew, everything she held dear, her family, her home, her security for a love that was forbidden, a future that was uncertain. She was risking everything, gambling on Tristan's plan, on his promise that he would protect her, that he would find a way to bring them together. As she rode, she thought of Tristan, of his strength, his courage, his unwavering devotion. She remembered his words, his touch, his kiss, the unspoken vow that bound them together. And she found the strength to keep going, to push through the fear, to trust in the path he had laid out for her. After what seemed like an eternity, the path began to climb, leading her towards a rocky outcrop that loomed against the night sky. She slowed her horse, her eyes searching the darkness, looking for a sign, a signal. And then she saw it. A faint glimmer of light, flickering in the distance, a beacon in the darkness. She urged her horse forward, her heart pounding with anticipation, with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She reached the outcrop, dismounting, her legs stiff and aching from the long ride. She tied her horse to a nearby tree, her hands trembling slightly, and approached the source of the light. It was a small cave, hidden amongst the rocks, its entrance obscured by a thick curtain of ivy. She pushed the ivy aside and stepped inside. The cave was small and damp, the air cool and still, the only light coming from a single, flickering candle that stood on a rough-hewn stone table. And standing beside the table, his face illuminated by the candlelight, was Tristan. He turned as she entered, his eyes widening slightly, a smile of relief spreading across his face. "Catherine," he said, his voice soft, his relief palpable. "You made it." She rushed into his arms, her body trembling against his, her tears soaking his tunic. He held her tight, his arms strong and reassuring, his presence a balm to her shattered nerves. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I know," he said, his voice soothing. "But you're safe now. You are with me." They stood there for a long moment, embraced, the silence broken only by the crackling of the candle and the beating of their hearts. The cave, a refuge from the world, a sanctuary for their love, felt like the only place she wanted to be. "What happens now?" she asked finally, her voice still trembling slightly. Tristan released her, his eyes searching hers. "Now," he said, "we wait." He explained that he had sent a message to Lord Morian, detailing Penthin's boasts and Catherine's fabricated acceptance of the marriage proposal. Morian, with his own reasons for wanting to see Penthin discredited, not the least of which was regaining his honor after the false accusations, had agreed to present the evidence to the king, who is known for his strong sense of justice and his intolerance for treachery. "It will take time," Tristan said. "The king is not easily swayed. And Penthin has powerful allies. But I hope that the truth will prevail." Catherine nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. The waiting would be the hardest part, the uncertainty, the constant fear of discovery. They spent the night in the cave, huddled together for warmth, sharing stories, whispering their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. They spoke of their love, of their desire to be together, of a life free from the constraints of duty and obligation. As dawn approached, painting the sky with hues of pink and gray, they knew they couldn't stay. They had to return to the castle, to play their parts, to maintain the charade until the king's judgment was delivered. They left the cave, the echoes in the stone, the memories of their shared night, a secret they would carry with them always. It would sustain. Chapter 14. The Lion's Den. Returning to Castle Lioness felt like stepping back into a lion's den. The atmosphere was thick with tension, with anticipation, with the unspoken knowledge that something was about to happen. Catherine felt the eyes of everyone upon her, scrutinizing her every move, judging her every word. Lord Penthin, unaware of the trap that had been laid for him, was even more arrogant and possessive than before. He treated Catherine as his betrothed, his property, his hand constantly hovering over her arm, his gaze lingering on her with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. Lord Alaric, still oblivious to the deception, seemed pleased with the way things were progressing. He spoke of the upcoming wedding, of the alliance that would secure Dunmere's future, of the power and prestige that would come with Catherine's marriage to Penthin. Catherine played her part, smiling politely, enduring Penthin's attentions, offering vague answers to her father's questions. But inside, she was a turmoil of emotions, of fear and anxiety, of hope and desperation. Tristan, meanwhile, remained in the background, his presence a constant source of strength and reassurance. He avoided any direct contact with Catherine, but their eyes met across the crowded hall, their gazes conveying a silent understanding, a shared secret, a love that defied the constraints of their situation. Days turned into nights, and the waiting became almost unbearable. Catherine felt like she was living on a knife's edge, constantly aware of the danger, of the potential for everything to fall apart. She slept little, her dreams filled with images of Penthin's leering face, of her father's disappointment, of Tristan's imprisonment. Then, one morning, a royal messenger arrived at the castle, bearing the king's seal. He demanded an audience with Lord Alaric, Lord Penthin, and Lady Catherine. The summons was immediate, and the tone was urgent. Catherine felt a cold dread creep into her heart. This was it. The moment of truth. The king's judgment had been delivered. She accompanied her father and Penthin to the great hall, where the king's emissary, a stern-faced man in royal livery, awaited them. Tristan was also present, standing near the entrance, his expression unreadable. The emissary read aloud the king's decree, his voice echoing through the silent hall. The king, having reviewed the evidence presented by Lord Morion and having conducted his own investigation, had found Lord Penthin guilty of treason, of plotting against the crown, of attempting to manipulate the alliance with Dunmere for his own gain. Penthin's face turned ashen, his eyes widening in disbelief. He opened his mouth to protest, but the emissary cut him off. "Lord Penthin," he said, his voice cold and formal, "you are stripped of your titles, your lands, your possessions. You are banished from the kingdom, never to return. Your life is spared only by the grace of the king." Penthin, his arrogance shattered, his ambition crushed, was led away by the king's guards, his head bowed in shame. The great hall erupted in a cacophony of whispers and gasps, the shock of the revelation rippling through the assembled nobility. Lord Alaric, his face a mixture of disbelief and anger, turned to Catherine. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What have you done?" Catherine, her heart pounding in her chest, looked at Tristan. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I did what I had to do, father," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To protect Dunmere, to protect myself, to protect the man I love." She turned to the emissary, her gaze unwavering. "Lord Penthin was a traitor," she said. "He confessed his plans to me, believing that I shared his ambition. I played along, gathering evidence, while Sir Tristan, with the help of Lord Morion, presented the truth to the king." Lord Alaric stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. He looked at Tristan, then back at Catherine, his mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of the deception, of the courage and cunning his daughter had displayed. He entered the lion's den, and the king's judgment cleared everything. Chapter 15. A Revelation by Firelight. The great hall remained suspended in a stunned silence, the echoes of the king's decree and Catherine's revelation still reverberating through the room. Lord Alaric, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly, struggled to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the woman who stood before him, a woman who had dared to defy him, to deceive him, to save him. He looked at Tristan, his gaze searching, questioning. Tristan met his eyes, his expression calm and resolute, his stance unwavering. There was no trace of guilt, no hint of apology, only a quiet strength, a silent affirmation of Catherine's words. "You knew of this?" Lord Alaric asked, his voice hoarse, his question directed at Tristan. "I did, my lord," Tristan replied, his voice clear and steady. "I devised the plan. Lady Catherine carried it out with courage and skill." Lord Alaric turned back to Catherine, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else. Was it admiration? Respect? Regret? Catherine couldn't tell. "You deceived me," he said, his voice low, his words heavy with unspoken emotions. "I did, father," Catherine admitted, her voice softening. "But I did it for Dunmere, for you. Penthin was a threat, a danger to us all. He would have used you, used our alliance, to further his own ambition." Lord Alaric was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Catherine and Tristan, his mind struggling to process the events of the past few weeks, the deception, the revelation, the implications. He finally spoke, his voice weary, his words laced with a hint of resignation. "I do not understand," he said. "Why did you not come to me? Why did you not trust me?" Catherine stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch her father's arm, a gesture of reconciliation, of explanation. "I feared you would not believe me, father," she said. "You are so determined to secure the alliance with Penthin, so convinced of his worth. I knew you would not listen to reason, that you would dismiss my concerns as youthful fancy. Lord Alaric looked down at her hand, his fingers covering hers, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in her words. He had been blinded by his own ambition, by his own sense of duty, by his desire to protect Dunmere, even if it meant sacrificing his daughter's happiness. And you, Sir Tristan, Lord Alaric said, turning his gaze back to Tristan. You risked your life, your reputation, for this deception.
Why?
Tristan stepped forward, his eyes meeting Lord Alaric's, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. I did it for Dunmere, my lord, he said. But I also did it for Lady Catherine. I love her, and I would do anything to protect her, to make her happy. His words, so simple, so direct, hung in the air, a declaration of love that defied the constraints of their world, the expectations of their station. Lord Alaric looked at Tristan, then at Catherine, his gaze lingering on their joined hands. He saw the love in their eyes, the strength of their bond, the unwavering devotion that had sustained them through the trials and tribulations they had faced. He saw, perhaps for the first time, the true nature of their relationship, the depth of their feelings, the potential for a future that was not dictated by duty and obligation, but by love and choice. As the evening wore on, and the initial shock of the day's events began to subside, Lord Alaric summoned Catherine and Tristan to his solar. The room was lit by firelight, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and reflection. I have been foolish, Lord Alaric said, his voice low, his words laced with a hint of self-reproach. I have been blinded by my own ambition, by my own fears. I have nearly sacrificed my daughter's happiness, the security of Dunmere, for a phantom alliance. He looked at Catherine, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and apology. I am sorry, Catherine, he said, for doubting you, for not trusting you, for not seeing the strength and wisdom you possess. Catherine smiled, her heart filled with a warmth that melted the last vestiges of her anger and resentment. It is all right, father, she said. I understand. Lord Alaric turned to Tristan, his gaze unwavering. And you, Sir Tristan, he said, I owe you a debt of gratitude. You saved my daughter. You saved Dunmere, and you have shown me the true meaning of loyalty, of courage, of love. He paused, his expression softening. I have been wrong about you, he admitted. I judged you by your past, by your association with the Morians, by the whispers and rumors that surrounded you. I did not see the true man beneath the surface. Tristan bowed his head, a gesture of respect and understanding. I understand, my lord, he said. I gave you reason to doubt me. No, Lord Alaric said, his voice firm. You gave me reason to trust you. And I will not make the same mistake again. He looked at Catherine, then at Tristan, his gaze lingering on their joined hands. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that spoke of acceptance, of approval, of blessing. The firelight danced. Chapter 16. The Weight of Honor. Lord Alaric's change of heart, though welcomed and deeply felt, did not instantly erase the complexities of their situation. While he now accepted Tristan and Catherine's love, the practicalities of their union remained a delicate matter, woven into the intricate tapestry of medieval politics and social expectations. While my heart is with you both, Lord Alaric said, during a quiet conversation in the solar, the scent of burning wood and old parchment filling the air, we must consider the implications. A union between Dunmere and a knight of uncertain lineage, it will raise eyebrows. It will be challenged. Catherine, seated near the fire, her hands clasped in her lap, looked at Tristan, who stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the distant, rolling hills. He had shed his guarded demeanor, but a certain wariness remained, a residue of the years spent navigating the treacherous currents of courtly life. I understand, father, Catherine said, her voice calm but firm. But Tristan is not just any knight. He has proven his loyalty, his courage, his worth. He is more honorable than any nobleman I know. Honor alone does not build alliances, Catherine, Lord Alaric said, his voice not unkind, but laced with the pragmatism that had defined his rule. It does not secure borders or fill coffers. Tristan turned from the window, his expression thoughtful. "My lord," he said, his voice respectful but firm, "I am aware of the challenges my background presents. But I am not without resources. I have connections, allies, and I have earned the respect of Lord Morian, who, as we have seen, is a powerful and influential man." Lord Alaric raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. He had not expected Tristan to possess such foresight. "Morian?" he asked, his voice curious. "You believe he would support your union?"
"Ido," Tristan replied.
"He owes me a debt of honor. And he sees the value in an alliance with Dunmere, an alliance forged not through forced marriage, but through genuine respect and mutual benefit." Catherine watched her father, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She knew that he was still weighing the options, balancing the potential benefits against the perceived risks. "There is also the matter of the king's approval," Lord Alaric said, his gaze shifting between Catherine and Tristan. "A marriage of this significance requires his blessing." Tristan nodded. "I am prepared to seek the king's audience," he said, "to present my case, to prove my worth, to demonstrate the benefits of our union, not just for Dunmere but for the realm." Lord Alaric was silent for a long moment, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest of his chair. He looked at Catherine, then at Tristan, his gaze lingering on their faces, on the love and determination he saw reflected in their eyes. He finally spoke, his voice firm but with a hint of warmth, a flicker of hope. "Very well," he said. "I will support your petition to the king. I will write a letter, endorsing your union, outlining your service to Dunmere, your courage, your loyalty." Catherine felt a surge of relief, of gratitude, of love for her father. He had finally, truly, accepted their love, and he was willing to fight for them, to stand by them, despite the challenges. "Thank you, father," she said, her voice filled with emotion. Lord Alaric smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Do not thank me yet, Catherine," he said. "The king is not easily swayed. But I hope that he will see the truth, the strength, the potential of your union." Tristan stepped forward, bowing his head to Lord Alaric. "I will not disappoint you, my lord," he said. "I will prove myself worthy of your daughter's hand, of your trust, of the king's blessing." The weight of honor, once a burden, now felt like a challenge, a goal to be strived for, a testament to the love that had endured so much, that had overcome so many obstacles. It was a chance to show the realm. Chapter 17. Beyond the Broken Blade. The journey to the king's court was a significant undertaking, a formal procession that reflected the importance of the petition. Lord Alaric, despite his initial reservations, now fully embraced the cause, understanding that a successful union between Catherine and Tristan could solidify Dunmere's position and bring lasting peace. Catherine and Tristan rode side by side, their hands occasionally brushing, a silent reassurance of their shared purpose. They were dressed in finery befitting their station, but their true strength lay not in their outward appearance, but in the unwavering love and determination that burned within them. The king's court was a spectacle of grandeur and power, a place of intricate rituals and unspoken rules. Catherine, accustomed to the more familiar surroundings of Dunmere, felt a flicker of apprehension as they entered the vast, echoing halls, the eyes of courtiers following their every move. Tristan, however, seemed unfazed. He moved with a quiet confidence, a natural grace that belied his humble origins. He had navigated these treacherous waters before, and he knew how to play the game, how to present his case with both respect and conviction. They were granted an audience with the king, a formidable figure seated on a raised throne, his gaze sharp and assessing, his presence radiating authority. Lord Alaric presented their petition, outlining Tristan's service to Dunmere, his courage in uncovering Arian's plot, his loyalty, and his love for Catherine. The king listened patiently, his expression unreadable. He then turned his gaze to Tristan, his eyes scrutinizing him with an intensity that made Catherine's heart pound. "Sir Tristan de Clare," the king said, his voice deep and resonant, "you are a knight of uncertain lineage. You have served Dunmere well, but your past it casts a shadow. Tristan met the king's gaze unflinchingly. My past is what it is, your majesty, he said, his voice clear and strong. I cannot change it, but I can shape my future. I can prove my worth, not through words, but through deeds. I have pledged my loyalty to Dunmere, to Lady Catherine, and I will honor that pledge with my life. The king was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Tristan and Catherine. He saw the love in their eyes, the strength of their bond, the unwavering determination that had brought them this far. He finally spoke, his voice softening slightly. Love, he said, is a powerful force. It can inspire great courage, great loyalty, great sacrifice. But it can also blind, it can deceive, it can lead to ruin. He paused, his gaze lingering on Catherine. Lady Catherine, he said, do you truly love this man? Are you willing to defy convention, to risk your position for this uncertain union? Catherine stepped forward, her head held high, her voice firm and unwavering. I do, your majesty, she said. I love Sir Tristan with all my heart, and I believe that our love is not a weakness, but a strength. It will bind Dunmere and its allies together. It will bring peace and prosperity to the realm. The king looked at them, his expression thoughtful. He saw the truth in their words, the depth of their feelings, the potential for a future that was not defined by the past, but by the choices they made in the present. He finally smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his stern features. Very well, he said. I grant my blessing to your union. May your love be a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of courage, of loyalty, of forgiveness. A collective gasp of surprise and relief went up from the assembled courtiers. The king's decision, unexpected and unconventional, sent ripples of excitement and speculation through the court. Catherine and Tristan, their hearts overflowing with joy and gratitude, bowed before the king, their hands clasped together, their love a visible force, a testament to the triumph of hope over adversity. The broken blade, the symbol of Tristan's past, of his family's disgrace, no longer defined him. He had forged a new path, a new destiny, a new life, bound together with Catherine's, by a love that had conquered all. And the future was theirs. Chapter 18. A Kingdom's Fate. The king's blessing transformed everything. The whispers and doubts that had once surrounded Tristan and Catherine's relationship were replaced by acceptance, even admiration. Their love story, once a source of scandal, became a legend, a testament to the power of courage, loyalty, and perseverance. The wedding, held in the great hall of Castle Lyonesse, was a grand affair, attended by nobles from across the kingdom, including a visibly humbled, but genuinely supportive, Lord Morion. Catherine, radiant in a gown of white silk and silver, looked every bit the noble lady she was, but her eyes shone with a happiness that transcended mere social status. Tristan, standing tall and proud in his knightly attire, his hand clasped tightly in Catherine's, looked at her with a love that was both profound and unwavering. He had overcome his past, his uncertain lineage, the doubts and suspicions that had haunted him. He had found his place, his purpose, his home, in Catherine's heart, in Dunmere's embrace. Lord Alaric, watching his daughter and her chosen husband exchange vows, felt a profound sense of peace, of satisfaction. He had been wrong, so very wrong, about Tristan, about love, about the choices that truly mattered. He had nearly sacrificed his daughter's happiness for the sake of political expediency, but in the end, love had prevailed, and Dunmere was stronger for it. The years that followed were a time of peace and prosperity for Dunmere. Tristan, now a respected member of the court, proved to be a wise and capable advisor, his counsel valued by both Lord Alaric and, eventually, by the king himself. He used his influence to strengthen Dunmere's alliances, to promote trade, to ensure the well-being of his people. Catherine, no longer a pawn in her father's political games, blossomed into a strong and independent woman. She became a patron of the arts, a supporter of the poor, a voice for the voiceless. She and Tristan worked together, their love a foundation for their shared commitment to Dunmere, to their people, to a future that was brighter than either of them could have ever imagined. They had children, sons and daughters who inherited their parents' courage, their loyalty, their love. The lineage of Dunmere, once threatened by war and treachery, was now secure, strengthened by the infusion of new blood, of new hope. But the peace was not without its challenges. The kingdom was vast, and there were always threats, both internal and external. Rebellions, conspiracies, and power struggles were a constant reality, a reminder of the fragility of peace, of the need for vigilance, for strong leadership. And then, a new threat emerged, a shadow from the east, a growing power that threatened to engulf the entire kingdom in war. A ruthless warlord, driven by ambition and a thirst for conquest, had gathered a vast army, and he was marching towards Dunmere's borders, his eyes set on the rich lands and strategic position of Catherine's home. Tristan, now older but still a formidable warrior, prepared for war. He gathered his men, sharpened his sword, donned his armor, ready to defend his home, his family, his kingdom. Catherine, watching him prepare, felt a familiar fear, a dread that echoed the anxieties of the past. But this time, she was not just a bystander, a pawn in the game of power. She was a leader, a partner, a force to be reckoned with. "We will face this together," she said, her voice firm, her eyes filled with a fierce determination. "We will fight for our home, for our people, for our future." Tristan looked at her, his heart filled with love and admiration. He saw in her the strength, the courage, the resilience that had drawn him to her in the first place. He knew that together they could overcome any obstacle, defeat any enemy. The fate of the kingdom, once again, rested on their shoulders, on their love, on their unwavering commitment to each other, to their people, to the ideals they held dear. A new dawn beckoned. Chapter 19. The Heart's Reckoning. The war against the Eastern warlord was long and brutal, a test of Dunmere's strength, of its alliances, of the courage and resilience of its people. Tristan, leading the forces of Dunmere, fought with a skill and bravery that inspired his men, earning him the respect of his allies and the fear of his enemies. Catherine, though not on the battlefield, played a crucial role in the war effort. She organized supplies, tended to the wounded, rallied the people, and maintained a steady stream of communication with their allies, ensuring that Dunmere remained strong and united in the face of adversity. The battles were fierce, the losses heavy. Many good men and women perished, their lives sacrificed for the defense of their home, their freedom. Catherine and Tristan, though separated by the demands of war, remained connected by their love, by their shared purpose, by the letters they exchanged, filled with words of encouragement, of hope, of unwavering devotion. One particularly devastating battle left Tristan gravely wounded, his body broken, his spirit tested. He was brought back to Castle Lyonesse, barely clinging to life, his fate uncertain. Catherine, her heart filled with a dread she had not felt since the days of Arian's treachery, rushed to his side. She stayed with him day and night, tending to his wounds, whispering words of comfort, praying for his recovery. The castle healers did all they could, but Tristan's injuries were severe, and his life hung in the balance. Catherine, watching him struggle, felt a despair that threatened to consume her. She had faced so much, overcome so many obstacles, but the thought of losing Tristan, of losing the love of her life, was unbearable. One night, as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, his gaze weak, but filled with a love that transcended pain, that defied death. "Catherine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I am here, Tristan," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I am here." He smiled faintly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Do not grieve," he whispered. "I have lived a full life, I have known love, I have no regrets." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, her heart breaking. "Do not speak like that," she pleaded. "You will recover. You must." He shook his head weakly. "The battle is won," he whispered. Dunmere is safe, that is all that matters. He closed his eyes, his breathing becoming shallow, his grip on her hand loosening. Catherine felt a cold wave of despair wash over her, the realization that she was losing him, that the love that had sustained her for so long was slipping away. But then, something extraordinary happened. As Tristan's life seemed to ebb away, Catherine felt a surge of strength, of determination, a refusal to accept defeat. She remembered the words of the king, spoken long ago, about the power of love, about its ability to inspire great courage, great sacrifice, great miracles. She leaned down, her lips pressing against Tristan's, a kiss filled with all the love, all the hope, all the life she possessed. She poured her strength into him, her will, her very essence, a desperate plea to the forces that governed life and death. And then, slowly, miraculously, Tristan's breathing stabilized. His eyes flickered open again, his gaze focusing on Catherine, a flicker of life returning to his face. He squeezed her hand, a weak but definite pressure, a sign that he was still there, that he was fighting, that he was not giving up. The healers were astonished. They had never seen such a recovery, such a defiance of the inevitable. They called it a miracle, a testament to the power of love, to the strength of Catherine's will, to the unwavering bond that connected her and Tristan. Tristan's recovery was slow and arduous, but he eventually regained his strength, his health, his spirit. The scars of the battle remained, a reminder of the price of victory, but they were also a symbol of his resilience, of his courage, of his love for Catherine, for Dunmere, for the life they had built together. This was their heart's reckoning. Chapter 20. A Dawn of Redemption. Tristan's miraculous recovery marked a turning point, not just in their personal lives, but in the fate of Dunmere. The near-death experience, the brush with mortality, had changed him, deepened his understanding of life, of love, of the responsibilities that came with leadership. He emerged from the crucible of war and suffering a wiser, more compassionate, more determined man. The victory over the Eastern warlord solidified Dunmere's position as a major power in the kingdom. Tristan, hailed as a hero, was offered a position on the king's council, a testament to his military prowess, his strategic acumen, and his unwavering loyalty. He accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to serve not just Dunmere, but the entire realm, to promote peace and prosperity, to prevent the kind of devastating conflict they had just endured. Catherine, too, embraced her role as a leader, a partner, a force for good. She continued to support the poor, to advocate for justice, to use her influence to improve the lives of her people. She and Tristan worked together, their love a foundation for their shared commitment to a better future, a future where peace and justice reigned. Years passed, and their children grew into adulthood, inheriting their parents' strength, their courage, their sense of responsibility. Dunmere flourished, its borders secure, its people prosperous, its future bright. Lord Alaric, now an old man, his hair white, his steps slow, watched his daughter and her husband with a profound sense of pride and gratitude. He had been wrong about so many things, but in the end, love had triumphed, and his legacy was secure, not through forced alliances or political maneuvering, but through the genuine love and unwavering commitment of two extraordinary individuals. One evening, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the castle walls, Catherine and Tristan stood together on the battlements, looking out over the land they had fought so hard to protect, the home they had built together, the love that had sustained them through so many trials. Tristan, his arm around Catherine's waist, his gaze filled with a love that had deepened with time, spoke softly. "We have come a long way, my love," he said. Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart filled with a contentment that transcended words. "We have," she agreed, "and we have done it together." They stood there in silence for a long moment, their hands clasped together, their love a silent testament to the power of perseverance, of forgiveness, of redemption. The scars of the past remained, reminders of the battles they had fought, the losses they had endured, but they were also symbols of their resilience, of their strength, of their unwavering commitment to each other, to their people, to the future. The dawn of redemption had arrived, not just for Tristan, not just for Catherine, but for Dunmer, for the entire kingdom. The love that had begun in the shadows, that had been tested by fire, that had defied all odds, had finally blossomed into a force for good, a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The future was secured, their love the reason.
Epilogue.
The tapestry in Lord Alaric's solar, once a symbol of Dunmer's vulnerability, its torn fabric a reminder of betrayal and loss, had been repaired. But the mending, though skillfully done, was still visible, a faint line running through the vibrant scene, a testament to the scars that remained, the wounds that had healed but not disappeared. Catherine, now a grandmother, her hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the wisdom of years, often stood before the tapestry, her fingers tracing the outline of the repaired section. She remembered the events that had led to the tear, the treachery, the fear, the love that had ultimately triumphed. She remembered Elias, the young squire with the poet's soul, the first love she had betrayed, the sacrifice she had made for duty, for family. She had learned, years later, that he had found peace in his monastic life, that he had become a renowned scholar, a respected teacher, a man of God. She had forgiven herself, and she hoped he had forgiven her. She remembered Lord Penthin, the ambitious nobleman who had nearly destroyed her life, her happiness. He had died in exile, alone and forgotten, his dreams of power turned to dust. She felt no pity for him, only a quiet satisfaction that justice had been served. She remembered Lord Arion, the traitor who had plotted to destroy Dunmer, who had caused so much death and destruction. He had paid the ultimate price for his ambition, his life forfeit on the battlefield. She felt no remorse, only a grim acceptance of the harsh realities of war, of the consequences of treachery. She remembered Lord Morion, the unlikely ally, the man who had once been their enemy, who had helped them expose Arion's plot, who had fought alongside Tristan in defense of Dunmer. He had become a trusted friend, a valuable ally, a testament to the power of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of the unexpected bonds that could be forged in the crucible of adversity. But most of all, she remembered Tristan. Her husband, her lover, her partner, her soulmate. He was gone now, taken by the gentle hand of time, his body laid to rest in the family crypt, his spirit soaring free. She missed him terribly, the ache of his absence a constant presence in her life. But she also felt his love, his strength, his spirit, surrounding her, guiding her, sustaining her. She knew that he was with her, always, in the whispers of the wind, in the warmth of the sun, in the laughter of their grandchildren. And as she stood before the tapestry, her fingers tracing the outline of the repaired section, she smiled. The scars remained, but they were no longer a source of pain, of regret. They were a testament to the battles they had fought, the obstacles they had overcome, the love that had endured, that had triumphed, that had shaped their lives, their destiny, the fate of Dunmer. The tapestry, like their lives, was a story of love and loss, of betrayal and redemption, of courage and sacrifice. It was a story of a kingdom, of a family, of two souls bound together by a love that had defied all odds, a love that would live on, in the hearts of their descendants, in the legends that would be told, for generations to come. And as the light shone, Catherine knew their story, their love, was eternal.